maglolo ay tanong mo sa iyong kamay.
Before these major religions, especially the Abrahamic religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, evolved in humanity's history, what we had, I would refer to as indigenous belief systems, and they were everywhere, in wherever humanity was, in any part of the world, whether you are now in Europe, you're now in North America, you're in Asia, everywhere there was this common characteristic of humanity that they raised their minds and their hearts to a deity. There was just this recognition of a power beyond human power. And early on, many archaeologists and anthropologists would tell us that the archetype was a goddess, was a female deity. In other words, our ancestors way back before these male-dominated religions arose, before the idea of a father god, of a Yahweh, of an Allah arose, people worshipped a female deity. And she was characterized in very feminine cosmic patterns, like she's the goddess of the earth, she's the queen of nature, she begets life, and yet at the same time she can also be a destroyer of life. So she was very much connected to the cosmic reality, and because it's so easy to understand, within human beings, who gives birth? It's the women, it's the mothers. And so the whole metaphorical language and the sort of meanings that arose out of their culture was very much connected to this giving birth in nature and in the human species. And it's the women that are like the intermediary to the birth. So when this construct of a provider for what is good on the earth would have arisen in the consciousness of our ancestors, it was feminine. So you had the goddess archetype. But, there are studies that show us that somewhere in time, just before the rise of the Abrahamic religions, our ancestors, especially in the Middle East area, in what is now that Middle East, where Israel and Iran, Iraq, Mesopotamia, that whole area, there was a whole struggle of this goddess being now impacted by a more male-dominated consciousness. And part of that was because wars were arising. There were battles. There were empires that were arising and they needed to protect each other. And therefore now, human beings needed brawn, needed warriors. And warriors usually were men. And when men began to assert their physical power in the battlefield, then that consciousness of a deity began to also evolve the notion of a father god. And that's how Yahweh arose, Allah. They were tribal gods of the masculine type. And so when that arose, that led to the construct now of the Abrahamic religions. And the Abrahamic religions became very masculine-oriented, very patriarchal-based. And so what was then a minor father god now became a dominant monodeity, and male in terms of its construct, And that's why along the way, the shift of the mother goddess turned into a father god, and these three religions really reinforced it. So by the time Christianity arose in Europe and the church got institutionalized, you had a Jesus Christ who was a male son of God, and then the whole patriarchy arose, and as a result of that, the religions became very dominated by a male construct, including the notion of who are the gods. Now, in order to assert that, it was very important to not emphasize anymore the idea of a mother goddess. And yet, a vacuum. There was a vacuum. People yearned still for some kind of a feminine figure. And so the Blessed Virgin Mary became like the substitute of that. So when they needed to have that kind of a bridging, the devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary caught up very easily. She can be an intercessor, an intermediary. Definitely she's not God, because the moment you bring it back to that notion of goddess, then that's a violation of a very important doctrine within Christianity, and especially Islam, because they're just so male dominant, in terms of their priesthood, in terms of their rituals, and things like that. And that's how Mary became popular. And yet Mary has to be taken in terms of being a human being, but never as a goddess anymore. But my contention is still, in the minds of ordinary people, among theologians, among popes, among bishops, and so on, the sort of categories are very, very sharp, and you have parameters of belief system. But among ordinary indigenous people, especially peasants, very close to the earth, there are none of these layers, no? Everything coexists with each other. And that's why, they believe in Mary, but the archetype of a goddess is still there. And they do worship Mary. Not just like Mary of the gospel, but Mary who really is provider, like God